right. Madam Chair, members of the board, Dr. Little. It's that time of year again. So as Dr. Little has said and everyone else has said, the 1920 school year was a year like no other. That doesn't change in the world of accountability and assessment because it presented some new and interesting challenges with regard to measuring progress. I'm typically a very quantitative guy, often to a fault, but the scarcity of standardized test data and the educational shifts that took place at the end of last year have caused us to redefine those metrics and methods we use to evaluate progress. And that's a good thing because standardized tests should never be the sole determinant of progress of any school or district. And we recognize that as a district, and that's reflected in our strategic plan because we use multiple measures to look at our success. So we're going to be looking at our progress this year through a variety of different lenses. We're going to look at student achievement. We're going to look at rigorous course enrollment, special populations and some things we're doing with them. We're going to look at career and technology education and discipline. So we'll go ahead and start with our proficiency in ELA and math. Now again, we are without SC Ready because of the school closure last year. So typically I'd be telling you about SC Ready scores and how we did this year compared to last year. Well, we don't have those scores. So what we do have is our formative assessment system, STAR 360, which gives us a pretty reliable predictor of performance in reading and math on SC Ready. They've done studies aligning those things so that they can come pretty close in that prediction. So we ran the predictions on students' most recent STAR reading score to look at the percent of students scoring meets or exceeds compared to the prior 2 years. And as you can see in reading, those percentages surpass the prior 2 years in all cases. So in the area of reading, we've made some significant progress there. Now, one of the reasons we might have made some of that progress is a focus on early intervention. So the district has invested personnel and time and professional development and funding in reading recovery. If you're not familiar with reading recovery, it's a intensive intervention program that's one-on-one. It works with the lowest readers in first grade. Now, again, we did not have any end-of-year text level scores last year. So what we did here to show how well this is working is we went back to our first cohort of grade 1 students who participated in reading recovery and compared them with those students who did not have reading recovery. So I don't know if my little pointy thing is working here. It's not. Okay. It is? I didn't see it. Okay, there it is. I get it. Okay, so the little orange dots here, red dots, are those students who participated in reading recovery. And the green line is their trend line showing growth from the end of first grade when they finished that reading recovery program to the end of their second grade. Now, the purpose of this graph is to determine is that intervention that they got in first grade sticking. And this indicates that these students over their second grade year showed a greater rate of growth than your typical students. That intervention lasts for a single year. And so those kids are continuing to improve at a steeper rate than kids who do not get reading recovery. As required by the Read to Succeed Act, we have to provide a summer reading camp experience for students who are at risk of being does not meet in reading. So those lowest students, again, in third grade. So what we see here is just the growth during the summer reading program of this past summer. So, showing their text level at the beginning of camp and their text level at the end of camp. So you can see there's some growth in here in text level. And it's an average growth of 1.2 text levels. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean anything in and of itself right here. So let me explain a little bit further. So in prior years, the summer reading camp was exactly that. It was a camp. And that camp lasted about 6 weeks, about 4 hours a day, 4 days a week. So they got 24 4-hour sessions, and they served about 150 kids, roughly, each year. The average text level change during that camp was 1.02 text levels, okay? This year, due to COVID-19 restrictions and concerns, we revamped that program and made it a virtual, one-to-one focused instruction program that really focused on individual student needs. It lasted 12 sessions of 30 minutes each online. We served 213 students, 42% more than we did the prior year, and got 1.24 text levels of growth this summer. So, being the nerd I am, I ran a statistical test on that, and it is statistically significant difference between those two models.
And
so,
Dr. Phillips, is that with the same FTEs assigned and the same cost?
That's a good question. I do not know the answer to that.
It was the same FTEs, but the important piece is the quality of the FTEs. We've been able every year to use the same teachers in our summer reading program, and that's made a big difference.
Okay. So let's move on to math. Math, again, we had to use STAR to estimate those SC ready levels. And as you can see, in every grade except for grade 3, we made some substantial progress here. Grade 3 showed a little dip over last year. It's a little bit higher than 2 years ago, but it's slightly lower than last year. So one of the things that we're doing is, again, focusing on that early intervention piece. We are piloting a program with a formative tool called iReady, which gives a lot more detail than our early primary grade teachers are used to getting with math on STAR early literacy. It's going to give them a lot more information about math at those younger grades and some instructional resources that will allow them to push those kids up at those earlier grades to get them to where we don't see that little dip. All right. Okay, so our takeaways for student achievement are this, with regard to ELA and math. With the exception of one grade level, and that's grade 3 math, achievement has been trending upward. And we feel like a lot of that growth is due to early intervention, particularly with reading recovery, and with our Read to Succeed camp model, which we'll be exploring even further. All right, so the next piece we'll talk about is rigorous course enrollment. So the district has invested a great deal of effort into increasing access to rigorous coursework opportunities for all students. At the end of the 1920 school year, enrollment in dual credit coursework has grown from 357 students in 17-18 to 526 students at the end of last year. This year we have enrolled right now 593 students. Now, from a course standpoint, that growth is from 985 courses taken to 1,542, with 1,644 being enrolled right now. So when you take that into college credit hours, our kids last year earned a total of 4,626 credits, which we estimate at a value of about $2.3 million of savings, college savings, potential college savings for parents. IB follows a similar trend. Now, this is a admittedly very small group of children, but this program is of the highest rigor and quality, and it's good to see that these kids, that more and more kids are enrolling in that program each year.
And that's their enrollment year, not their graduation?
That's correct. All right.
We're hoping too with the IB programs in our middle and elementary schools.
That'll grow even more.
That will, because I've been on the board since we introduced IB, and I always thought it was a little odd that you started with high school instead of pushing up. So I'm real pleased to see us do that.
Good. So the access to rigorous coursework is also increasing for underrepresented groups, particularly our students of color and students in poverty. So you'll see that in honors coursework, in high school, we had 754 students in 2017-18. By the time last year ended, we were at 944. That's a 25% increase in those students enrolling in honors coursework. And APIB is even better. It's a 47% increase, up from 206 students to 303 for our students of color, our underrepresented students of color. All right, so along these lines, the students participating in dual enrollment overall is up almost 50%, so 47%, and the number of courses taken is up 57% since 2017-18. Students of poverty used to, in 17-18, represent only about 11% of the dual enrollment students. That is almost doubled now to 22.5%. And students of color taking at least one AP, IB, or dual credit course has increased by over 30% over the past 3 years. All right, moving on to our special populations. And when I'm talking about here are students in response to intervention and special education. So one of the innovative approaches the district has taken to address the need of special populations, namely these RTI kids and special ed kids, is a shift from a pull-out model where students are removed from the general education classroom to receive support to a push-in model where a teacher comes into the classroom to work alongside the general ed teacher to provide those supports for students. This has given some opportunities that weren't there before. So, for example, RTI has moved to a full implementation of push-in at the middle school. And what they've seen is that students have more opportunities for exploratories, and there's more of a link between the intervention support and the core curriculum. So instead of those things existing in isolation, they're now together, and instead of teachers feeling or like when they're removed from the class, they no longer are their responsibility or they can't have any control over that, they now are working together with the support person to improve the education for that student. And there's at least partial implementation at all of the elementary schools. You can see here where we are with that. For special ed, this past year was a little more of a developmental year. So there was a lot of piloting going on. So with reflection tools and collaboration procedures, doing learning walks to see how things were going in the places that were piloting things, and PD and coaching for those teachers. Now, there was some implementation at some schools, and what they are finding is positive effects for special education teachers, general education teachers, and administrators. So here's some of the benefits that special ed teachers saw. So first, they were able to get better information to parents about student progress because they were in the general education classroom with those students. And they were able to provide strategies that the general ed teacher may not be familiar with in real time. They're able to keep track of kids with regard to the standards just by providing that differentiated instruction. And this was important. They felt more included and needed by the general ed teacher, and they didn't feel like an intrusion. And again, they were able to work with gen ed students to better gauge levels at which their students were able to work. Now, the general education teachers felt like they were getting more support by the special ed teacher, and they were able to work cooperatively with the special ed teacher to use data to drive their instruction. Because again, the teacher's there and it's real time. And they're able to conduct small groups that were more individually tailored to the kids in those groups based on their IEP needs. And then administrators got some additional training. They found that they had better developed trust between the co-teachers and the administration, and they were able to do some deep data dives with those SPED teachers to help them get the data that they needed to provide the general ed teachers. The third group we'll talk about here is our English language learners. So the number of our English language learners tested each year on the English proficiency test, Access, has gone up slightly over last year. The percent of students meeting their progress goal, each student has a progress goal based on their starting point. And so the number of students meeting there, or the percent of students meeting that progress goal actually dipped slightly, although it's not a drastic drop. But the number of kids who are scoring proficient actually went up slightly, okay? So the takeaway from this is that the number of our ELL students continues to rise. Results remain relatively consistent over time. Statewide, districts often operate ELL programs with very limited resources. We continue to outperform similar districts in this area. One thing that we've done is that beginning this year, we have sort of revised our strategy for leveraging Title IV money, which is additional support money for different groups, and to the Title III grant rules. Okay, so Title IV can be used to fund other title programs. Title III is your ELL fund. So by leveraging those additional funds, we were able to provide personnel, so 2 additional ELL teachers in some of our schools with the higher populations. And we were also able to provide some online English instruction software for our lowest kids in the form of Rosetta Stone. Next, let's talk about career-based learning. So it was an interesting year for career-based because of the closure. Most of your certification exams happen at the end of the year. So we had an increase in completers from 1,645 to 1,713. Our non-traditional participation, and that would be those courses where typically they're all female or all male, and you have the opposite participating in them, is up slightly. And our students with at least one certification is up, about 200 kids. However, the number of certifications you'll see is down quite a bit. Well, there's a reason for that, right? So many of the certification tests were not available at the end of the year. Talked to LTC about that, and they indicated that teachers had been working all summer to get those tests rescheduled and administered so that those kids could get those certifications. So we look forward to seeing those numbers actually jump up a little bit here in the fall once those tests get administered and scored. And then finally, we'll talk about discipline. And again, discipline data, if you look for the whole year, last year was a little crazy because amazingly, discipline incidents dropped off very sharply on March 17th. Everybody started to behave. No, I need to survey parents about referrals at home. So what we did was we looked at discipline data in the August to March period for 3 years, so that we were kind of getting a comparable look at these numbers. So what we have here on the top is the percent of students in our population with one or more discipline referrals. So that's gone from 20% slightly down to 19.7%. And then for our students with one or more suspensions or expulsions, that has stayed pretty much the same over the past 3 years. So what you see here is that these discipline rates are remaining consistent over time. Obviously, you always want to see things like this go down, but they're not increasing, so that's good news too. Okay.
I think too, and does that factor in that we've had such an increase in student population?
It's based on a percentage of students.
Yeah, so it would.
We try to take that
Yeah.
into account.
I was going to give us a clap on the back.
Okay, I'll be happy to answer any additional questions you guys have.
So, Dr. Phillips, you've probably already thought about this because you think about everything. But as you were talking about the rigorous coursework and like the dual credit and the AP coursework, you know, I have 2 children in college now, and I'm very mindful of anything that we can do in our schools to save parents money in college. And I think there should be some consideration given to somehow incorporating those students that earn the seal of biliteracy into those numbers, because like my daughter, she didn't do AP Spanish. However, because of the Spanish curriculum that we have in place, she got her seal of biliteracy, and then when she got to USC and took the placement test, she placed in the 6th semester of her Spanish coursework.
Wow.
And so I think that seal of biliteracy might be a good indicator of rigorous coursework in foreign language. So
Noted.
just an
I'll be
idea.
happy to provide those numbers if you'd like at a
That would
later
be
time.
great. Thank you.
State giving us any feedback about when the standardized testing will come back online? I mean, are
It is.
we expecting it in the spring or
So,
January?
yes. So, the superintendent's received a letter from Secretary DeVos that was sent to Molly, I think last week maybe, or this week, that basically said, you can write a waiver, but we're probably not going to give it to you. So, this year we have worked with schools to plan to give every standardized test that is required by the state and the federal government. The state has said that we are to provide those tests in a face-to-face setting, no matter what model your student is learning in. So our Lula students will have to be brought in to actually take those tests in a face-to-face model. Now, one thing that the state is working on is potentially a waiver for the accountability piece, so that we would take the test, but they would get a waiver this year for the report card again, given the situation.
All right, thank you, Dr. Phillips. We
Thanks, sir.
appreciate that data review.